Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Virtual SSA, Sense and Sensibility, Smart and Sustainable Cities. Before we begin, please ensure that your microphone is muted, and please do take part in the discussion by sharing your comments or questions using the chat function. Our moderator, Esther, CDL's Chief Sustainability Officer, will address your questions accordingly. The session will last a little over an hour and will be recorded and accessible on our CDL Sustainability YouTube page. Over to you, Esther.
Okay, first, very warm welcomes to all, and thank you again to join us at the Sense and Sensibility, Smart and Sustainable City webinar. And to counter today's the world's climate, social health, and crisis, we need all hands on deck that really go beyond borders, culture, gender, and age. And the building and construction sector has a very high environment impact, and accounting for 39% of carbon emission globally. So the world's fast-growing urban population is expected to hit 70% of the total population by 2050, less than 30 years. And we need better design, innovation, technology, as well as people-centric management to achieve a smarter, greener, and also more resilient built environment. And today we are very, very delighted to have a few forerunner in green building and smart city and buildings, ladies with us from different parts of the world. And let me introduce them. And the first one is Lauren Sokin, Executive Directors of Global Resilient Cities Network, who have a very rich experience globally, and she is currently based in Singapore. And Victoria Cage Burrows, Director of Advancing Net Zero, World Green Building Council. She is currently based in Paris. And we were also trying to reach out to Chris. Unfortunately, this is an unearthly hour. She is now in US, and it is 5 a.m. in the morning. And we have missed communication now. I hope that she will sign on later on. And then Emily Tan, who's actually the General Manager of Shell City Solutions. And last but not least, as Emily Behan is the founder and CEO of Green Building Consulting and Engineering, who's actually based in Bangkok right now. So, of course, now today we are going to really have a treat and listen to the insight and aspirations of all these ladies. And Lauren, would you mind to start the ball rolling and introduce yourself, to our audience? Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Esther. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be addressing all of you who are tuned in. If you're on call today, you're probably already aware that we are drastically out of step with the planetary boundaries that we face. And in fact, cities are on the front line of these issues. Cities are where we have, as Esther mentioned, the bulk of our population. They concentrate opportunity, but they also concentrate risk. So I run a network called the Resilient Cities Network, and we help cities around the world to become more resilient to the physical, social, and economic challenges that are a growing part of this century. And none of us need to be reminded of how intertwined those challenges are in a year like 2020. The network that we run is city-led, regionally driven, and partner-based, as well as clearly impact-focused. All of the efforts that we make must improve urban dwellers' lives in the cities that we serve. Our program builds on over 10 years of investment from the Rockefeller Foundation and the former 100 Resilient Cities program. So we have cities, 97 of them in the network, on 6 continents, speaking 27 languages and representative of 47 countries. And what's really important about that is that cities can lead this change, and in partnership with actors from the private sector, from academia, that coalition, having all hands on deck that Esther mentioned, that is how we are able to respond to these challenges. Next slide, please. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by resilience, because it's a word that has been so often used, in particular in 2020, in the context of COVID-19. We want to be able to bounce back. So when we're talking about resilience, when we're talking about how this integrates with sustainability, what does that actually mean? when we talk about urban resilience in the Resilient Cities Network, we have given our cities and also those they work with a common definition of urban resilience. And you see that definition here on the slide. It is that capacity from the individual level to communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, adapt, and not only that, but grow, no matter what kind of chronic stress or acute shock they experience. And here you see what we mean by shocks and stresses. And this is something now that we've all come to experience, and how interlinked shocks and stresses are. We are all experiencing climate change, rising temperatures, more intense precipitation, more frequent storms and floods. At the same time, we have acute shocks that hit us, like disease outbreak, like COVID-19, as well as earthquakes and other things that may happen suddenly. And now what happens is we have to face both these chronic stresses, these slow burning challenges that can weaken the fabric of society at the same time that we're facing shocks. And so taking things with a resilience approach allows us to do this and actually plan better, plan for multiple benefits, and strengthen the cities that we work in by using this common definition. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide and actually practically talk about how we work. So what does it mean to apply resilience in practice in cities, and how does this relate to sustainability? So the way we work within our city network is by 3 delivery areas, 3 activities that we do. First is to empower cities, and that's through peer-to-peer exchange and collaboration and training. We also work very closely with cities on implementing the projects that will build their resilience, and we help them to mobilize finance. And just one example of that before I wrap up here is the Urban Ocean Program. Now, when we talk about sustainability and what our cities and companies and academic partners can do together, we look at various issues where cities have a big role to play. Building and construction is one of them, energy efficiency. This particular program that I'm about to talk about, Urban Ocean, focuses on the waste sector. And it does so because 80% of ocean plastic actually comes from cities in Asia and the Pacific. Now, we as a network wanted to act and wanted to help our cities to be more sustainable and to eliminate ocean plastics. And so what we've done is, in our spirit of empowerment, we've created a community of practice with several cities who manage waste very well, from Europe, from Japan, from Korea, and we have linked them with cities in our network who have emerging waste management systems. We've shared technologies, we've shared good practice. Having that peer-to-peer support allows cities to elaborate projects and prepare them so they can attract partnership and investment from the private sector to make those projects work. So we feel, and we have seen and demonstrated, that collective action between cities, having a common set of goals and a common definition of resilience that ensures that multiple benefits are baked into each and every project, is a way that we can accomplish sustainability goals with, as Esther says, sensibility. So with that, I just want to go to the final slide and share that all of our actions are really to create this safe and equitable as well as sustainable world. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to discussing with the other panelists.
Wow, wonderful, Lawrence. Well, we look forward to, sharing more from you. And Victoria, hi. You must be really recovering from the whole week of, Advancing Net Zero Action Week at World Green Building Council. And this has been always your pet project, Advancing Net Zero and also Embodied Carbon. So without further ado, I hand over to you to share more about your passion and your work. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you very much, Esther, and a huge thank you to you for allowing me to address your audience today and tell you a little bit about Advancing Net Zero and the World Green Building Council. We are a global action network of around 70 green building councils across the world, working to catalyse the built environment for more sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere. And the Advancing Net Zero project came about because we had this recognition that, as Esther set out in the very introduction, buildings are responsible for a huge amount of carbon emissions globally, as much as 39% of energy related carbon emissions. And so we drastically need to cut those emissions, to take responsibility and have accountability for the emissions that our sector is responsible for. And so this project was brought about by the World Green Building Council to kind of shift the transformation from green buildings and more sustainable buildings into net zero buildings, so trying to completely eradicate emissions associated with our sector. And we do have a whole life carbon vision, which combines the concepts of operational carbon. So that's the energy associated with heating and cooling, lighting and powering our buildings, but also embodied carbon. So the embodied carbon that comes from materials and construction. So our 2050 vision is that new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon. And all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operational carbon. And this is of huge significance to cities because it's estimated that around about half on average of energy consumption within cities comes from those buildings. And cities have a huge amount of procurement power in terms of how those buildings are created, how they're operated, and within their own public buildings as well, how they are purchasing products and materials and those buildings themselves. So there really is a huge onus here on cities and other policymakers and demand side actors to help drive this transformation. And we include within some of these concepts a definition for what we mean by operational carbon, what we mean by embodied carbon, with some guiding principles of how we believe is the best practice application to achieve these. So in terms of operational carbon, we are talking about the way buildings actually perform. So we're shifting into a more performance-based approach. We're asking organizations to disclose how much energy and carbon emissions are associated with their buildings. Because yes, energy consumption is important, energy efficiency is very important to drive down energy wastage, but where that energy comes from is equally as important. That's how the carbon emissions are generated. So it's important to both know how much you're using and where it's coming from. So the guiding principles encourage the reduction of energy demand, but also generating balance from renewables where you can on site or buying from off-site sources, and then finally offsets as a final resort. And in terms of embodied carbon, we have a 2030 target that recognizes between now and 2060, the world's building stock is going to double, which is a huge amount of additional infrastructure and buildings. And so we need to recognize the time value of carbon in those materials and those buildings that are being created today. And so we have a target for 2030 that new buildings, infrastructure and renovation have at least 40% less embodied carbon, with a significant upfront carbon reduction. And the way to reduce embodied carbon is through, first of all, preventing. So really considering whether you need to build new at all or whether you can optimize renovation, for example. Reducing and optimizing embodied carbon through approaches like lean construction and different technologies that have low carbon alternatives where you're buying materials from, thinking about the transport miles. Planning for the future in terms of adaptability and flexibility of buildings, but also when the building reaches the end of its useful life, that it can be deconstructed rather than demolished, and the materials used with it as part of a circular economy. And then again, finally, offset as part of a strategy to achieve that net zero balance where you can't eliminate all emissions completely. So we're really encouraged by setting this framework, by the action that was being demonstrated last week as part of World Green Building Week, that these principles are starting to be embedded within decision-making processes and particularly procurement choices. But there is unfortunately one no solution that fits all. The approaches and the applications will vary very much, even within different countries within a region and certainly across the world. So on the next slide, we have some examples of how our green building councils around the world are taking those concepts of operational carbon and embodied carbon, those guiding principles, to try and ensure as much commonality and alignment in approaches as possible, but also allowing the flexibility for them to create something that's very locally and contextually appropriate. So For example, some countries are starting with a focus on operational carbon or even operational energy, and recognizing buildings that achieve net zero in performance. And then there's schemes like from the US Green Building Council on LEED Zero that actually certifies buildings that are LEED Zero in energy, in carbon, and in waste and water. So they're kind of broadening out the scope there. And then there's frameworks and certification programs and different approaches from countries like the UK or Germany, where they're incorporating a full whole life carbon, so including both accountability for operational carbon and embodied. And then of course, from Singapore, the super low energy approach, so that idea of recognizing the constraints geographically and based on regulation that exists within a country, and taking buildings as far as they can within that viable sort of opportunity to reach net zero. So from a super low energy or a net zero ready approach. But really this means that although the schemes are called something slightly different, how they might have different criteria such as energy efficiency, performance requirements, they are all driving their markets towards zero, towards that whole life vision that we've set out from the World Green Building Council. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share that with you today, and look forward to a discussion with the rest of the panelists. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Victoria. This is only the starter. We will have you back later. And indeed, in Singapore, together with Singapore Green Building Council, we've been, trying to engage our supply chain as well. When you talk about embodied carbon, we need them to really, understand the whole concept and how they could contribute. Okay, for building, almost half of our OPEX actually go to energy. So now, it's a good time to bring in an energy specialist, and Emily Tan, who's actually General Manager of City Solution from Shell, and we hope that she can actually share some light on how we could help to lower our carbon footprint and also improve energy efficiency. Yeah, over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Esther. I'm pleased to be here today amongst this impressive group of women, and grateful to have the opportunity to share with you the work that I lead in Shell on sustainable cities. I will start my presentation with a macro view of why and how cities need to navigate energy transition towards a lower carbon future, what Shell is doing to help, and specifically how my team works with cities around the world to implement sustainable solutions. So let me start with the why. So the world is changing fast. Climate change, COVID-19 global pandemic, and technological advancements are just some of the forces reshaping economies and the way we live and work. Lives and livelihoods, economies and communities depend on convenient, reliable, and affordable energy to thrive. As the global population increases and income rise, demand for energy will grow, especially in cities. Meanwhile, the need to address stresses on the environment, especially climate change, has never been more important. But more importantly, customer needs and expectations are changing. Shell's purpose is to power progress together with more and cleaner energy solutions. In step with society, Shell set itself the ambition to become, by 2050 or sooner, a net zero emissions energy business. Despite the immediate challenges of today, it is important to keep an eye on the long term. Our work in Shell New Energies, which City Solutions is a part of, is called to the net zero ambition. Shell is building an integrated lower carbon power business driven by the changing needs of our customers, providing a range of cleaner energy products and cleaner power. We are looking to partner with others, as we just did with Microsoft, to advance net zero. We will work with sectors which use energy to help identify and enable decarbonization pathways for them to follow towards a net zero emissions future. If I go on to the next slide. So at Shell City Solutions, the business that I head up, we partner with cities. As the world continues to urbanize, the way in which city populations produce and use energy must shift to meet global development and sustainability goals. At Shell City Solutions, we want to help cities navigate energy transition through integrated urban solutions. We have set up the City Solutions Living Lab in Singapore to encourage more collaboration and partnerships on this journey. It's only through collaboration that we can test and deploy various technologies in urban environments. For example, we have worked with a spectrum of stakeholders in Singapore to help them navigate energy transition. We have worked towards increasing renewables, including solar at our rooftops, introducing innovative battery solutions to better harness the solar energy, implementing lower carbon fuel options for heavy duty transport, and helping to accelerate the electrification of vehicles in step with the country's shift towards cleaner energy vehicles. In Paris, we co-hosted a city scenarios workshop with the OECD and the Vinci Group, with 45 key stakeholders from public and private sectors, to discuss how to collectively address and meet the objectives of the Paris 2050 Climate Action Plan. The challenge is to deliver a low carbon city in the context of rapid urbanization, with more people, transport, and energy demand. We work with the stakeholders to examine the possible impact of COVID-19 in these scenarios, and the updated scenarios will be published very soon, so do look out for that. So Shell has a unique position with our breadth of products and solutions, our global reach and global partners, and importantly, our desire to help the world move towards a lower carbon future. So come and partner us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Certainly, we will hear more from you how to partner you. Yeah, okay. So now I will bring Emma along. She is a very, very technically sound, engineer, green building expert, and she will probably help us to, solve the little mystery of how to bring our building, to super low energy or even net zero. Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you for inviting me here and for all of you who have tuned in. So my name is Armel. I'm the founder and CEO of Gdc, a Bangkok-based consultancy that conceives high-performance buildings with a people and planet at heart. As we all know, and as it has been brought up by you, Esther, Victoria, and all the other panelists as well, carbon and decarbonizing the built environment is really crucial if we want to be in livable cities in the future. And we think this is exactly what we need to tap on. And if we want to decarbonize the building sector, we must look at how the value chain operates. Can you please put on the next slide? So the value chain for any kind of construction projects is composed of distinct stages: ownership, finance, development, design and construction, manufacturing of building elements, and operations. Now, each of these stages is operated in silos and has its own internal stages, processes, stakeholders, and even supply chains. The fact that these processes are distinct, as well as the very fixed term and project-based nature of project themselves, makes relationships along the supply chain also temporary and project-based. This makes the industry, the whole industry, and the structure of this industry highly fragmented. If you look at how decisions are made along the value chain, they tend to follow a flow from left to right, from owners to users, each prior segment influencing the next. The actors that are going to have the most influence on a project are usually the owners, the investors, and the developers. But now if you look at carbon, most carbon emissions are generally concentrated in the manufacturing of building elements, so embodied carbon, and the operation of buildings, operational carbon. So for most stakeholders, and the ones that do have influence on a project, carbon emissions might seem quite outside of their scope of influence. And they might think that because these emissions are emitted by someone else or by another supply chain, they don't really have anything to do with it. But the reality is that these decision makers are the ones who are going to play a major role in steering the decisions of how a building is going to be designed, built, but also operated. Decarbonizing the whole building environment requires stakeholders to not think by sector, but to think at a systemic level, which goes beyond their own sector and beyond even their own company. In order to facilitate this change, our field of action is articulated in three gradual steps. The first one is advocacy. So we raise awareness among public and private sectors through talks, guest lectures in universities, and tailored training programs. The second one is capacity development and ecosystem creation. So we create B2B ecosystems to foster partnerships by organizing sustainability-focused events and connecting usually disconnected actors of the value chain, bringing them together basically to understand what are the links in the industry. And last but not least, advisory and engineering. So we help to consult design teams, but also project owners, bringing up smart, sustainable, and healthy buildings. Whether it is for energy and water savings, health improvement, or even complying with certification. So how do we apply this to design? Well, there's several fundamental approaches that we rely upon. The first one is we apply a holistic thinking to design. where we pursue basically possible synergies between environmental, social, and economic sustainability principles. It relies on the belief that the whole is greater than the sum of parts, and it kind of counters any kind of conventional design process thinking, which results often in a result which is poorly coordinated or disconnected from the market. The design process is also a bit different. Although we follow the same design stages, the integrative design process has a greater workload in the early phases of the project. This leaves room to change without it being costly down the line. It also involves a multidisciplinary team very early on into the project, and it works with iterations to study design alternatives and optimize building performance. Last but not least, we rely on a bioclimatic approach, which uses the sun, the wind, and the rainwater to supply buildings with lighting, cooling, ventilation, and water needs. And then we measure all these kind of improvements with computer modeling and digital twins to ensure that the performance is actually met and that we reach and comply with environmental certifications such as LEED, WELL, or EDGE. Input for the next slide. So these are some of the projects that we've been working on. Basically, our objective is any building built or to be built that has the potential to become greener. So across all market sectors, hospitality projects, healthcare projects, residential, commercial, and most recently airport projects, and notably the Utapao Airport City in the Eastern Economic Corridor of Thailand. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, ladies. And unfortunately, we still couldn't connect with Chris. And well, we'll just start the discussion first, and hopefully she will be able to catch up later. And just to remind the participants, do feel free to share your questions in the chat box, and we're going to weave into our long list of questions. So I suppose you have also heard from all the panelists that look like they are all in their own right building resilience in a way for cities as well as building. And while COVID has actually taught us that things can change with very little lead time, and it has actually caused a lot of disruption to the way we live, work, run our business. And so resilience seems to be the buzzword today, that I want to to ask the panelists to share how does building resilience fit into the overall sustainable and smart city agenda. Lauren, do you want to start first?
Sure, thanks, Esther. I think I only started to touch on what is really a very big topic. When we talk about resilience in the context of sustainability, they're complementary, but they're not the same, right? When we talk about sustainability, and probably everyone on this call can put one hand over their heart and one hand up and actually restate what sustainability means, right? Which is our actions that don't compromise future generations.
Okay.
Well, that's one thing, and I think they highlighted how we can get to goals via carbon reductions, right? Net zero targets that will help us with sustainability goals. Now, both of them, and I also spoke to the need to actually look at the interconnection between social and economic goals that we have in the present. Resilience is actually about being able to respond to the challenges that you're faced with, right? And to come back from those challenges with strength and with kinds of opportunities. So when we think about it in particular right now, we look at the kinds of opportunities that COVID-19 has actually woken us up to. So there's this opportunity that's been created because the world came to a stop in many sectors to actually reevaluate and prioritize how we design for both resilience and sustainability at the same time. So when we are making choices about how to use the vast stimulus packages that are coming through from governments, and how private sector actors actually responsibly partner with governments in deploying those resources, there's a real case for looking at what are the things that we can do that are going to strengthen our city or community in the present, that are also going to put them on the path for these sustainability goals. So resilience are the choices that you're making to fortify those weaknesses that were laid bare, that you saw, right? Where are our vulnerabilities? And so just in one very specific case, we can see that in terms of air quality, right? When things slowed down in cities, air quality improved. How do you retain that from a resilience perspective to increase people's health so that they don't have underlying respiratory conditions that are triggered that make them more vulnerable to viruses, while at the same time planning to reduce emissions and reduce the need for car-based transport going forward. So these are the kinds of things where you have resilience considerations that can help you get to sustainability targets.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Yeah, well, certainly that we know that COVID seems to be like, you know, taking the top priority of many countries, actually. So, you know, people's, you know, saving life and help to recover, you know, from COVID seems to be like the top priority of many countries and many businesses. So in the area of green building, Victoria, maybe you can, you know, share with us that will, you know, businesses or building owner really put, you know, off some of the so-called, you know, green building agenda or net zero. And to them, I think probably most important thing is to save job and also, you know, maintain business viability. So maybe Victoria, then after that, you know, Emily, and then Amal, maybe you can just chime in. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, Lauren is absolutely right. We've had a huge shock to the system with the global pandemic. We did stop. We've stood still effectively. You know, we've all stayed at home and flights have stopped. You know, we've stopped the commute, the kind of the usual things that people associate with emissions. And yes, that's had a hugely positive impact on air quality. But actually, even though we stopped, global carbon emissions are only expected to be reduced by around about 15%. Now that is the biggest reduction ever. So to be sort of optimistic on the one hand, you know, it does show the impact that we can have on, but it's a very extreme impact for us all to stand still and then have at least a little chip away at the emission reductions that we need. But to sort of put a pessimistic view on it, it is only 15%. And why is it only 15%? Well, we've all stayed at home. We've shifted our consumption patterns from being in the office to being at home. We're still using energy. We're using a huge amount of fossil fuel-based energy. And so those emissions simply haven't reduced. And the emissions reductions have come from other sectors. And so we still have, if anything, it shines a huge light on the green building industry that we have a huge responsibility to take that forward and push that trend even further down. What we are seeing is yes, governments are very stretched and they have lots of priorities of things to deal with at the moment. But over the past week, especially with World Green Building Week, but also Climate Week New York, there's been a huge amount of corporate announcements that have been coming out around businesses that are taking that action towards really evaluating the impacts of their own organizations and what they can do to contribute towards the emission reductions. So we're really inspired by the amount of action that's being taken by businesses. Our entire campaign last week was to say, you know, yes, governments are having these unprecedented crises to deal with, but we as a sector know exactly what we have to do to address the emissions from building and construction, and that we are prepared to deliver that. We have the supply chains that are ready to go, the actions are being taken, and so that sort of glimmer of hope is hopefully going to be sustained long after you know, the pandemic is in the distant memory.
Great. I love your positivities. So what do you think, Emily? Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. Let me comment sort of both on the resilience part as well as on the impact of COVID. I think Lauren mentioned about how do cities stay resilient. So for example, the city of Houston, Shell actually donated 1.8 million 2 years ago in 2018 to help Houston overcome the effects of hurricanes that's hitting the cities. And when you think about resilience and when it comes to climate change and impact of COVID, what has kept economies going is actually We are still able to communicate now via video conferencing because we have electricity. So one of the key things we also need to think about is energy resilience. See, how do we ensure the energy system remains resilient despite any climate change impact of natural disasters, or even in COVID situation, everything shuts down, right? You still need to have the energy. So the energy system itself is evolving. We are looking into more and more renewables integrated with other technologies like battery. We're looking at distributed energy resources that can provide backup systems and keep a city a lot more resilient in terms of crisis. So that is something that we also need to consider and put into the picture of how to keep a city resilient while maintaining the sustainability targets. And I think to address Victoria's point about companies stepping up to net zero, so I'm proud to say, yes, Shell did that as well. We actually increased our net zero targets during the pandemic. It was probably a difficult decision to make, but nonetheless, I'm proud that the company has chosen to take this direction. And it's something I can really live by and makes me happy to do the work that I do. In terms of looking at what has happened to us at the start of this decade as well, Shell has published scenarios on rethinking the 2020s. A lot has already happened in this year. And there are various scenarios that we look at. Would people prioritize wealth? Would people prioritize health? Or would they prioritize security? In each of these scenarios, different kind of outcomes can come out. The most optimal and optimistic scenario will be the health first scenario, where people are prioritizing health. And they're looking at technology to help them overcome the challenges of the pandemic. And as a result of that, more collaboration is also needed. And collaboration is not just within the country, but cross-border collaboration. And that can also bring on the need to continue that journey of collaboration for sustainability. So that's the scenario that we hope will happen. But there's also two other scenarios where we need to watch out for and prevent sort of the worst case scenarios from happening as well.
Yeah, certainly. So Amam, over to you. Yeah, I think you're on mute. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, on the topic of resilience and the link to sustainable cities, I think that's I want to make kind of an analogy to an engineering kind of analogy to maintenance. I guess it's a bit like looking at a city or a building as, are we going to have a corrective or a predictive kind of maintenance? I think we're at this stage where mitigation is good, but we also need to have adaptation, and resilience in cities is a lot about adaptation. If you look at, for instance, Bangkok here, every year we have severe floods, severe also heat strains as well. And there's a lot of solutions that are being brought to actually retain water in certain areas of the cities. There's not enough greenery, so this is one of the reasons why, for instance, we get flooded. And the reason why we get heat strokes here is also because the buildings that are built here are used with materials that create an urban heat island effect. So I think resilience and sustainability, even if you look in certifications and the kind of criteria that actually push for, is really, really linked. Actually, one without the other means that we're constantly going to be repairing stuff instead of being able to enjoy or live correctively, I would say, in the city. Now, coming to COVID and to I would say the reduction of environmental push, there's been this in the beginning here, like most sectors, slow down, but there was gradually a pickup afterwards. Basically, people have seen the link, I think, more and more between buildings and health. So more than the energy aspect, which has been here for a long time, I think people are making this link, especially with certification like WELL, for instance, that really push for indoor environmental quality, but beyond that as well. And people are understanding that we need good ventilation if we want to be continuing to have any kind of gatherings, for instance, inside places. So in that sense, we personally, as a consultancy, have seen an uptake in demands for renovations to better health standards.
Maybe we want to have actually follow-up question on resilience. I have actually on the chat here, KK from Macau, and he was talking about that recently there was actually some super typhoon that in 2017 and 2018 respectively, where the resulting in a lot of glass facades were broken. So now if you want to ask, any panelists can address to this issue about the resilience of, facade or, yeah. Hello. Yeah, maybe Amel, do you think you can share some of your technical knowledge about the resilience of a facade of building?
So I'm not a facade specialist, but I'll try to do my best on this. I don't have here. There's not too many examples of building facades that are built for resilience of typhoons. But I used to work in Taiwan, and there was a lot of work done in this area. Basically, there's a lot of things done in structural, but there's also the size of the buildings that can play a role as well. Winds tend to be at higher speed, at higher level of buildings. So when you have very high skyscrapers, it's actually one of the issues. For instance, big materials. I don't have any specific input for this. That's what I would say.
Okay. Any panelists want to chime in? If not, I will pass the mic, the stage to Chris to cover the intro. Is Chris? Are you there? I saw you just now. Maybe you switch on your video and unmute. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to fix my connection.
Yeah.
Okay, I think everything's good now. Can you guys hear me now? Clear?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. You can start.
Okay, that's perfect. So basically, this is a 2-minute presentation. Anyhow, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris, and I'm the Executive Director of Smart City. Smart City is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization based in the Philippines, and our focus really is to jumpstart and to future-proof the smart cities in developing countries. So second slide, please. Okay, so what we noticed in the developing countries and emerging markets is that 85% of the e-government or digital transformation projects failed, and only 15% succeed. And basically, we're trying to address the gap here, wherein first, the small cities really had to need help in terms of jump starting their smart city development.
So actually, we let's follow up on the so-called resilience and also the developing nations that actually are most prone to, biggest impact, whether it is climate change, climate crisis, or even health crisis. So all of you have experience working with emerging economies. So maybe you can share how we could actually, embrace a UN SDG that we can actually tap on, the resources of, the capital market or the richer nation to help, the emerging economies to deal with, all these crises. Yeah, Lauren, maybe you have actually experienced, working with many cities, both, developed and developing. Maybe you can share with us how you could actually help the emerging market.
This is a great question, Esther. So thank you for asking it. It's really critical that we meet cities where they are in this agenda. When we're looking at the ASEAN region, there are a number of countries. I mean, if we're looking at neighboring Indonesia, if we're looking at Vietnam, that are rapidly urbanizing and building the necessary infrastructure that they need. Chris is representing cities in the Philippines who are also rapidly urbanizing. You've got a few huge urban centers and then many of these secondary cities. So there are a couple of things I think that we can do to really build the resilience of these cities. The number one thing is to be longer term partners. And I just want to say that and let it sit for a while, because I know that a lot of the folks on this call, whether you're in real estate or in energy, you do think in this way, right? You actually want to partner the locations where you're based. I mean, that is the story behind Shell in Houston, right? That's the headquarters in the US. So it was actually strategic for Shell to say, we want our city, we want our headquarters to be more secure. So we want to invest in a resilience plan. we heard from businesses in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, after the outbreak of really civil disobedience this year. How do we prepare for that? How do we make sure that actually our city is more equitable? Because we can't do business in a city that is shut down, right? So you have to consider these different kinds of things. Now, going back to the emerging markets question, meeting cities where they are. So being a long-term partner with cities means understanding where they are in their infrastructure agenda. And so I thought it was really, you know, beautiful what Victoria showed earlier, that there's really different entry points, and because of the different entry points, different solutions. What I would say about resilience planning and sustainability planning is, even at the secondary city level, many of these cities actually have a plan already, or they have some prioritized projects. So that goes to the second way that you can really help emerging cities. And that is by looking at the existing plans, listening, and then adding value to projects that have been prioritized. So maybe there is that low-income housing development, maybe there is that office park. How do you, with the expertise that you bring, and it's particular if much of this audience is signing on from Singapore, bringing the lessons from Singapore about how you design, right, with those higher standards to those emerging markets at a price point and at a, you know, a technology level that is appropriate there. And then the third piece of this, and it comes back around to the long-term partnership, is investing in the capacity of those cities. So actually spending time building the relationship and building the knowledge of those partners in order to be able either to operate or to regulate, right, to that higher standard over time. And I think if we're able to do those three things, really be invested in long-term partnership, bring experience to the places and projects where it's needed most, and also build capacity of city actors, then we will see much, much better results. And we've seen that within the cities in our network.
Okay, wonderful, Lauren. Since we have Chris back, I really have to catch you now. And talking about emerging markets, you know, maybe I know that you have actually quite a relevant experience, especially in some cities in the Philippines. Do you want to please help us to, you know, share something while your signal is up?
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I don't know why it's happening. It's only now. Anyhow, so basically we're future-proofing the smart city initiatives in the country as well, and in developing countries by pushing for local data portals. Because currently what we notice in the country is that there's no local data portals wherein the developers or even the private companies can tap to understand what the city is at right now. So just I have to note what Lauren said earlier, that it's really important for us to understand the needs of the city itself. And currently in the emerging markets, it's really hard to get the data where they are. And it's really hard to get, you know, any information about the projects, the existing projects that they have. So in order to future-proof the smart city and smart sustainable city initiative, we're pushing for the local data portals in the emerging markets. So next slide, please. So for this, currently we have different partners. We have partners from Belgium. The Open and Agile Smart Cities Network is, I think the member cities are 150 cities. We're in there pushing for interoperability. So we believe in the smart sustainable city to succeed. The interoperability on the ground level on different cities is really needed. So we partnered with the GDG Philippines as well. It's the Google Development Group in the Philippines, and Google for Nonprofit, the TechSoup community. Most of the partners we have currently is civic organizations, because we believe that it should be a different approach currently. As I've mentioned earlier, the digital transformation and developmental projects in developing countries and emerging markets usually failed because they don't really have the buy-in from the civic organization, and we need to address that currently. So these are the partners that we have right now. I think that's basically it. Okay, so So that's
Okay.
it. We're always happy to talk, and these are
Yeah.
you can reach us through this.
Yeah,
through this.
certainly, no problem. Victoria, we have 70 over, National Green Building Council. Some are actually in the emerging market. Maybe you want to share your experience in that. And actually, Emily too, you have actually experience about partnership and how Shell can actually extend help to support all this emerging market. Vic, you go ahead first. Then Emily, please chime in later. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, I just wanted to share. I think it's something like 194 countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement, right? That are committed to incorporating within their nationally determined contributions effective strategies and plans to reduce emissions from their countries, right? So all sectors across their economies. Of those, I think it's 104 that have already got strategies in there to address energy efficiency from buildings. And we know that improving energy efficiency in existing buildings, making sure that the highest standards are incorporated into new buildings are the most cost-effective ways of reducing carbon emissions. But it's only around about 60 countries out of that 194 that have existing building energy codes, which is really worrying because it just means that buildings are being created as they sort of know in terms of the local resources and the local knowledge. They can learn a huge amount from countries that have been exploring how to improve green buildings or improve the impact of buildings for literally decades, and try and leapfrog some of the lessons that we've learned in terms of the types of codes that are most effective in reducing energy consumption, which ultimately brings huge amounts of social benefits. If homes are more cost effective to run, they're cheaper to operate. If schools are healthier, provide better internal environments. And so making sure that these buildings that are being created now, that are being built now, are fit for purpose for the future, that have that inbuilt resilience, that mean that they can anticipate the future needs of society and have climate robust designs against some of the climate events that we're seeing happening. Then there's a huge amount that can be transferred across different countries, across different borders. And so our green building councils are helping with that approach. Our entire work programs are incredibly collaborative. This is not a problem that can be fixed by one part of the value chain. It's a shared burden, and we all have to play a part.
Certainly. Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Esther, for that. So Lauren mentioned about Shell's participation in Houston. So we feel that wherever we have a presence, we are part of the community. So we do want to contribute towards the sustainability of the cities where we have a part in. But beyond that, as well as Shell's move towards a lower carbon future, we also have an energy access program that is looking to provide electricity to communities that currently have no access to electricity. And this we are doing through investments into companies that can provide innovative technologies like local microgrids, solar to power homes, and we are doing this in the developing countries. As part of the response to COVID, we have also granted 1.7 million to 6 companies providing electricity in India, Kenya, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Uganda to support customers in financial difficulty because of the pandemic. These are to companies including Delight, PowerGen, Husk Power Systems, Op Energy, and Solar Now, which will help their customers pay for electricity for up to 6 months and contribute to the installation of solar power systems in hospitals and schools. Through this program, we are able to help to these customers' existing customer network. We should be able to reach about 700,000 people to help them in this pandemic.
Wow, sounds great. Amal, just, what is the business case that you can actually convince emerging markets, some businesses, and to also, don't lose sight on, lower their carbon footprint of their building while they are surrounded by many, many other priorities?
Yeah, I think you really put the finger on the issue in emerging countries is the business case. A lot of actors actually want to do it, but they're not too sure if it's really going to yield any kind of financial return. The misconceptions on costs are still very, very high here in the region. They can go by 20% or even twice as much, and they're very difficult to convince because data from existing projects is not really shared. So as Chris was saying, it's very difficult to find data because they don't want to really disclose data by fear of being either pointed out or being, practically being pointed out, basically. So I think if we really want to have this happening here, the business case needs to be pushed. I know there's a lot of studies that we actually use to show clients from the World Urban Building Council on business case around the world, that there's often this response of, it's not exactly my building, it's not exactly my area, we're using air conditioning, it's not heating, and this whole I would say cycle goes on, and there's no kind of confidence in the fact that there's going to be really a business case for it. What I think is essential is, if there are, like there was in Europe when we started all these movements, both some incentives, but also some better regulations to actually push this, the business case is going to make itself by itself. There's not enough, I would say, incentives here. There's very few that are actually pushing for energy efficiency improvements or renewable energy generation. There are some, but they're very specific on a specific sector and for a very temporary moment. So I think this would be the, I would say, incentive, regulations, and maybe better explaining the business case applied to localities would really help emerging countries in being able to tackle SDGs.
Mm-hmm. Other panelists, do you have any, insight or any points to add to, to talk about the value of energy and carbon reduction and all that in this situation that we have to, compete with other priorities and health and all that? And after that, I'm also mindful of time that after this question, we will go to the closing remarks already. Yeah. So any thoughts on that, about the value of carbon? Victoria, your pet subject.
My closing remark was going to be around the value of carbon, because I think that's the way that the business case conversation and that narrative is evolving. We have some fantastic front runners, those businesses and governments that are really taking a step ahead of the pack, if you like, and are setting these really high demand targets, which then generates the sorts of innovation that we need from the supply chain to create the solutions. And ultimately, as more people are using those solutions, then the cost is ultimately going to come down, which will help us strengthen the business case. We've seen the business case for green buildings in general strengthen over the past few years, over the past decade or so. Now that we're really embracing a net zero strategy, those companies that have taken that first step to show that it's possible and take a little bit of risk in terms of premium are really helping us with driving that cost down and strengthening that business case. And it's true that it will hugely vary from country to country, but we're hopeful that it will mean that it doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive moving on. And I think also broadening out so that we're not just thinking about the business case in terms of dollars and cents, but actually the broader value proposition. We've heard earlier about how buildings can enhance human health, and people are really taking that value to heart as well. And so I think broadening out not just the cost of something, but actually how it can bring benefits to an organization over time is really helping to strengthen that broader value proposition for high performance buildings.
Mm-hmm. Great. Emily, value of energy. Certainly your priority, right?
Yeah, I think the value of energy, of course, the value of energy is always important because people need energy, right? And I think balancing energy with carbon is also a very important link. Indeed, in countries where there's a price on carbon, there's also a price on how much carbon that your energy that you use generates. And it also helps to promote more collaboration. Once you have a price on carbon, and if that can be, there's a marketplace to trade that carbon, you enable a lot more technology solutions to be implemented to reduce that carbon, and then that to be shared into a pool. So it's a whole sort of ecosystem that needs to be in place such that we can all collaborate towards reducing carbon while we go through the energy transition.
Okay, great. We have about 4 or 5 minutes, and I just want to go around every, panelist to share with us, in one statement that what will be the world that we want, in particular for women in this, business landscape and all that. Lauren, can I start with you, and then followed by Victoria and Chris and Emily and Amal?
That's That's a wonderful question, Esther. And what we need is, we need to have a sustainable and resilient world that is safe and equitable. And inherent in that is a world in which everyone can participate in creating that vision. I think we've stated a number of times the need to extend the way we measure benefits from just monetary to monetary and environmental and social, and to be able to look at that full picture, right? That full analysis in a way that's meaningful. So I think in order to get there, we're going to have to continue to define the tools and the metrics in a way that take us step by step. And I'm very confident that with increased focus that we have and the existing knowledge, if we're linking different organizations and expertise, we can get there.
Great. Yeah. Victoria?
I think that collaboration is so important so that we can create those tools, and the tools and the data is so important to making sure that people can make informed decisions. We need to place a value on carbon. Projects need to be evaluated for how much of our remaining carbon budget are we using, not just how much is it going to cost us in monetary terms. And that will help embed into all procurement decisions, your home purchasing decisions, the energy supplier for your home, but also those bigger decisions at a macro level on those projects and growth and expansion within cities. Carbon needs to have a value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, for me, I agree with that. I think what way forward would be not to go, business as usual. We need to focus not only to push for the public-private partnership, but we need to look into a four-piece, like public-private and people partnership. I'm looking at a world, basically a smart world with a heart, where citizens and data are at the core of any urban or even rural development. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, Emily, your wish.
So I echo the other panelists talk about collaboration. I think collaboration is absolutely key to go towards sustainability. And we need collaboration among government, the private sector, as well as the community to make things happen. And on your topic about, especially for women, I would say encourage all women. I hope that others won't hold women back, and women won't hold ourselves back in wanting to pursue our passion in sustainability, and together we can make cities wonderful places to live in for the future.
Wonderful, thank you. Amel? You are on mute, yeah.
Yeah, I really have to second and third the value of carbon, because I really think this is what is going to drive a difference in basically not putting just a cost, but putting a value on our natural capital. So I would say this would be one of the things as well that I would support. Then in terms of women, I would like to see a lot more women in science and in technology. I think it's crucial. If we want to have some holistic kind of thinking to problems, we need more women who are going to decide or just think about these problems with men together.
Yes. Indeed, the cost of inaction is going to be, outweigh the cost of action. So I think the value of carbon, the value of, sustainability is priceless, if you ask me. So in closing, I really, really appreciate every, panelist for your sharing. And if I could close my own wish, that I really want the world, to be in harmony with nature and also truly equitable, where women are given equal opportunities to contribute to a sustainable future. And with that, I thank everyone who dialed in. And before you go, can you switch on your camera? Let us have a group shot. Men or women, please. Great. Yeah. Hi, Christina. Thank you for dialing in. Wonderful. So yeah, my colleagues here will take a couple of pictures. Smile to the camera when you're ready. And there are still some are not, on switch on yet. Tracy, Rina, yeah, everyone, yeah, Angie, Mavis, yeah. Great. And hi, Joya, dialed in from Mauritius. Thank you for joining us. our doors are closed, you know, at the Sustainability Academy, but our windows are open. So we are reaching out to Christina. You are now in London, right? Yeah, it's amazing. Joya in Mauritius, and there are a lot other countries as well. Okay, let's smile to the camera. Great. And you want the next page also, Rina, and the team? Wonderful. And thank you so much. And well, we are going to organize more events. Since the lockdown in April until now, we have actually organized 15 online events already. And we are going to organize more under the umbrella of Women for Green, as well as Youth for Climate. And we will keep you updated of what is coming up next. And thank you very much once again. Wherever you are, stay safe and all the best. Bye-bye.